Well, I am very excited to be here today with Robyn Hitchcock. Robyn, thank you so much.
Hello, Jason. You're welcome. Hi there. Hello.
And we're here in the courtyard at the beautiful Largo here in Los Angeles, California. This is a venue you've had the pleasure of performing at in the past, correct?
Yes, it used to be on Fairfax and Rosewood, a little way up the road, but also in West Hollywood. And then it was a cafe. And then did you ever go to that one?
I didn't, no.
Okay. Well, now it's moved here, and it's that cinema in there. There's the big Largo, and then there's the little room there where Woody Guthrie and John Coltrane and all kinds of people have played, and me. And the little room is actually, I think, my favourite venue on the West Coast.
Really?
Possibly barring the Fillmore.
Wow, okay.
But the main gigs are in there, so tonight I'm playing in there.
In the big house.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Well, Robyn, I wanted to ask you about the current tour. You've been doing a lot of shows with Emma Swift, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How's that been going?
Well, it goes pretty well. Emma and I are a pair, we're a couple. She's Australian and I'm British.
Yeah.
She's female and I'm male. She's quite young and I'm quite old. So there's a lot of terrific contrasts, if you like. But we both have quite strong voices and quite strong feelings about the music we love, and we have a kind of intersection.
Yeah.
You know, she's probably as traditional as I am, but she's in a tradition that is sort of Tammy Wynette, Dolly Parton, Graham Parsons, Neil Young, Lucinda Williams, you know, that word ending in Anna, that people, when it's applied to people, they all say, not me, Gov. You know, I'm known as having sprouted from psychedelic compost. And I suppose Emma and I intersect around probably the Byrds, Neil Young, the band, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
But we have cross-pollinated a bit, and we've even managed to make a record, and we've got another one hopefully coming out in the autumn. You know, just a 45. But we're very separate entities. But she comes and sings on the last few songs of my set, and I think our voices work well. But I'm what I think call a stylist, which, if it's not applied to a hairdresser, means somebody who has a stylized vocal, whereas Emma has a lovely sort of creamy, honey-like mid voice, you know,
like a foundational element.
Quite full, you know. My voice is much more nasal and kind of cutting, but we can both get really loud if we choose to, and I like the way our voices, the graph of our voices follows each other. We get loud and soft together very much the same way, you know, the dynamic is good.
Yeah. Well, sounds like a very beautiful yin and yang thing that we're looking forward to seeing here tonight. And speaking of really interesting collaborations that you've done, Robyn, I'm a big fan of Grant Lee Phillips. And my understanding is that just about a week ago or so, you guys did your very first online concert. I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Oh, it was exactly a week ago, yes. Grant also lives in Nashville, or just outside Nashville. I mean, I used to play with Grant here at the old Largo.
Wow.
Grant lived in LA for 20 years. Wow. Grant's now in, just outside. He's a neighbor. So he came and sat on our sofa, and we sang about 8 songs, and people paid $5 each to watch us do it. But I don't think there's any record of it. It just happens it's like streamed, it's not archived.
Yeah. Is there something, by the fact that it isn't archived, but it's just basically showing a live performance, there's an organicness to it that, warts and all, kind of?
Well, in a way, all concerts have got warts. In a way that you're paying for the warts. You're paying for the reality of a performance, not the retakes, not the touch-ups, not the whole thing that you get with a video or an in-concert movie or something like that. It's just
no Jonathan Demme involved in this. Yeah.
No nothing like Jonathan Denby. There's Emma's laptop, which she put on a table, but couldn't operate because it had to be looking at us. So Grant and I was squinting at this little picture of ourselves, and
What was that like for you as a performer? First time in that.
nice. It was nice. Grant and I we have toured together in the past, and we've played a lot. Largo, as you know, encourages people to sit in with each other. I've got a few people coming up tonight, and Grant and I are veterans of playing covers and playing medleys and playing each other's songs, and he's very quick. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen with Grant, and you don't necessarily know what's going to happen with me. So it's you kind of have in theory you know where it's going. But so it's perfect. He's really happy to do something like that. He's not going to make a fuss about having the extra camera or it was lovely. We'll see if maybe we'll do another one. I don't know.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Well, you're mentioning Grant, and I've had the pleasure of seeing him perform with Howie Gelb of Giant Sand many years ago in a similar kind of dyadic, performing with another artist. And I've seen you perform before, and you guys both have a very organic responsiveness to your performances in terms of taking requests. Something that I don't necessarily see in. You and Grant, actually, from what I've witnessed. And there's an interest, that's in my concert going experience, kind of a unique dynamic. I always love seeing kind of what you bring to the stage and how you interact with the audience.
Well, I think we're quite fluid, and I think How is another one like that. I mean, How he's more kind of cloudy or misty than he is liquid, but How kind of gradually comes into a room and then gradually leaves it. And when he's on stage, the songs kind of gradually appear and then they seem to go. He's not a man of sharp divisions. Yeah. It's not very clear cut. It sort of wafts in. I think we're all quite fluid, quite indefinite performers, and none of us are very brittle. You don't know exactly. I mean, I have a set list, sort of, but I'm not, especially if there isn't a band, you're not glued to anything. It's not like the drummer's going to think you're starting a different song because they can't hear you or you didn't tell them you've swapped it round.
Yeah, the guys won't be upset at you after the show.
No, or on stage. You don't, when you've got a band, you do have to be more coordinated, but I think we're all, in a way, we're all more like troubadours or buskers or street performers. But having said that, it also relies on a certain amount of trust with the audience. They have to be able to. They have to provide the water for you to walk on. They need to encourage you to work your magic, and if that's what you're working, if it's not malfeasance.
Well, Robyn, when I've seen you before and you were working your proverbial magic, it was so interesting to see you taking requests from the audience. I saw you at McCabe's guitar shop in Santa Monica 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, June of 2014. And I stayed for both shows. You were doing two different shows. One was a little bit more thematic, I think. The second show, maybe doing more Dylan covers and maybe a little bit more of a focus, if my cloudy memory reminds me.
The first show was all going to be covers.
Oh, okay.
The first show was all covers and my songs as encores, and the second show was all my songs and covers as encores. Gotcha. That was the principle behind that one. Yeah, I remember. Yeah,
it was lots of fun, and seeing you interact and take requests from the audience, I always wanted to know: are there certain requests that you get a lot, maybe of old like Soft Boy songs or things that you really don't necessarily like playing, but the audience is, requesting certain songs that you're just not necessarily resonating with?
And I don't play them.
Just don't play. Okay.
I mean, it's also more a question if I can play them.
Yeah.
Some of the Soft Boys songs were quite complicated, or they had 3-part harmonies. They're not songs that are gonna sound good in the skeletal form that I present them in. I play some songs from the Soft Boys era. They were my songs after all, but they're the ones that will sound good with a voice and a guitar.
Gotcha.
And I play. I've been going a long time, so I do incorporate a lot of older songs in the material because that's what people like, you know. I mean, any old song I think I can do justice to, but I don't change them much. I think the arrangements drift, like the foundations of old buildings drift. You know, Queen Elvis is not what it was when I recorded it. It has changed. You know, it's just little bits here and there, not deliberately, but just simply by playing it over the years, its shape has changed.
And I've heard a lot of interviews with you when you're talking about kind of the you know, starting out either in the Soft Boys or as a solo artist, and looking back on some of those songs and just how the concept of identity, as you mentioned earlier, is kind of fluid, that it's hard to sometimes recognize or I don't know, sort of resonate maybe with some of those early materials because of just being in a totally different place in life at that point.
I think that some of the old songs kind of knew more than I did at the time. The voice in my songs, if you like, the voice that comes to me when I'm writing them, is not always the same one, but it's very often a kind of Greek chorus in my head, or a sort of prophetic one, or a voice that's basically saying, if you turn left, you'll get lost. If you turn right, you may also get lost. Or I wouldn't say that to that person if that's what you're thinking of, or you know you're going to regret this. It's usually some rather miserable old kind of English aunt or uncle, you know, or school teacher. So I wouldn't do that if I were you, you know, or some kind of minor cop who's going to be ignored, but nonetheless who's going to put their voice in. You know, it's not the big judge. It's not the one with the gavel who brings you up, and it's a voice that's saying, "Ooh." You know, and as a Brit, I hear that. I hear very much a kind of, we're very good at being doubtful, at being sort of, ooh, they're not going to like this, you know. And it's, and I have all these kind of voices in my head, and they sort of prophesy. I mean, sometimes they're encouraging, sometimes, but you know, I always think my songs have a kind of wisdom that I don't have. If you like, they're from the part of me that can see things that as a conscious person I don't. I'm not prepared to deal with this stuff. I want what I want. You know, I want to have a big plate of egg and chips, and then the voice is going, you're going to get fat, especially if you have ice cream. I don't care. I'm going to have. I want egg, chips, and ice cream. You know, that's my and beer and rosé and every. You know, I want it. I want all of it. You know.
Well, it's kind of Freudian, kind of the id, ego, superego, all wrapped into one constant struggle.
Probably is. I've never quite understood what the definition of the super. What is the superego?
I think the superego is sort of that highly moralistic aspect of one's upbringing that's thrust upon them through socialization, whether it's church. You know, be a good boy. If you work hard, you will be rewarded. Those high moral standards. You know.
Right. There's some kind of parental voice, which is something that you try to please, but you also kick against, in a way that gives you your fuel for life. Exactly. Because you're trying to appease it in one way and trying to demolish it in another. Exactly. And that it's a kind of, you know, sometimes I think it's actually smarter than that. I think it's not even it's not a moral or a finger-wagging voice. It's just something that happens to be able to see across a plane of time that you can't. And you know, I've thought in the past that my songs are actually messages from the future. You know, just that I had happened to.
You're kind of an oracle of Delphi. I mean, there's something prophetic about.
But I'm really only. I mean, it's only really an oracle as far as I'm concerned. It's only my future. I mean, it's not hard to prophesy doom. Everybody does that. You know, when. First thing I remember is the Bay of Pigs and the John Kennedy standing up to Khrushchev and the prospect of a nuclear war. The first international situation I remember was that. Wow. And since then, you know, doom sells. There's, you know, the threats changed. It used to be nuclear war. Now it's environmental. Yeah. But in between, it's constantly, you know, society disintegrating? Is it economic or environmental or moral collapse, or are we just going to sit here till the leaves fall?
You're always one to really speak truth to power, and I've always really admired that in your lyricism. And Robyn, I wanted to ask you about you've really worn your heart on your sleeve in terms of through covers and really mentioning the influence of so many artists that you really kind of inspired you to be a musician. Syd Barrett, the Byrds. I kind of wanted to talk to you briefly about the influence of David Bowie, who of course sadly passed a few months ago. Was Bowie an influence on you, or not so much in terms of the 60s psychedelia kind of?
He wasn't a primal influence, but I listened to him a lot. I never kind of thought, oh God, I wish I'd done that, or oh, I wish I'd been in that. The way, with an exquisite Byrds song, or Syd Barrett's work, or the Beatles, or some, Captain Beefheart, I would imagine myself doing it. With Bowie, and we've covered Hunky Dory for Médecins Sans Frontières. I used to do these concerts we used to do gigs in pubs in London. We do an album for 2 nights, and one of the albums we did was Hunky Dory, so I've done Bowie, I've covered Bowie songs, and I've listened to him a lot, and I think he was brilliant. He was Bowie was the Dylan of the 70s. He had that momentum. He had the looks, the ambition, the talent, the humor, the irony, the self-knowledge, but not so much self-knowledge you just thought, oh, it's not worth it, is it? It didn't make him it didn't make him nihilistic or apathetic. It just drove him, and he like Bob Dylan in the 60s, Bowie created the times, but he reflected them. He was really
for better or worse. The collaboration with Mick Jagger, Dancing in the Streets from the 80s, not one of the high points in his sort of catalog.
I think it was his momentum decade was the 70s, like Dylan's was the 60s, and then afterwards he did good stuff, but it was erratic for whatever reason. I mean, but to be somebody who is that to the world, to the music world, to the culture for a decade is enough. I think after that you're allowed to do
given a free license to do whatever the heck you need.
Go and recite the Lord's Prayer, or make records with Freddie Mercury, or actually I quite enjoyed that Dancing in the Street as an exercise of two quasi-straight British narcissists in mid-80s drag. I thought they did. What I liked about it was that they were each one was as self-important and vain as the other, but they made it work. It was like a double act where you didn't have a straight man. It would be like the Marx Brothers with 2 Grouchos. It was like the yin and yang, but 2 yins.
And especially the undertone. I mean, they're alleged, or I don't know if it's just alleged, but their dalliances through the years together, and that it's a very interesting video of them, touching, homoerotic perhaps some might argue.
Yeah. I mean, faggy scenes, man. But actually, the person that each of them is most in love with is themselves. That's what I mean. It's true narcissism.
Two Dorian Grays.
And in the Dorian Gravy, but they each could see himself reflected in the other. Jagger knew that. He said about Bowie, I love David, but every time you see him, next time you see him, he's wearing the shoes you were wearing last time. Oh, yes. And that whole sort of British straight showbiz being a bit gay kind of, it's I don't know. They both really good at it. Very smart guys, and I like them because I'd watch that and I think, oh, who's winning?
Who's upstaging the other? Yeah.
And I thought actually they both, apart from the fact that obviously Bowie would have admired Jagger when he was younger, and to Jagger probably Bowie's like an upstart a bit, but Bowie had been upstarted for 15 years by the time they did that, and they're probably well into their 40s or something. I don't know, but you know, dancing around and plus it was the 80s, so you know that whatever they were wearing looks ridiculous now. My old bass player, I think, played bass on that record. Matthew Seligman used to be in the Soft Boys.
Yeah, the two of them together, almost like the unstoppable force and the immovable object. Just sort of a Herculean dynamic of two big forces together.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, Jagger's still there, Bowie's gone, but you know, not an ounce of fat on either of them.
Yeah, very much so. Well, Robyn, kind of back to a more sort of positive, sort of nostalgic question, perhaps. And I ask this of a lot of artists that we interview. Having, again, referenced many times your influences, I actually want to know what your very first album was that you purchased, if you can remember back then. Do you remember actually purchasing your first 45 or LP?
My first 45 was It's All Over Now by the Rolling Stones. And I was 11. And I remember just there were these big 17-year-olds at the desk of the record store. You know, their voices had broken and they seemed to go up to the sky. And there was me, this sort of squeaky little kid, coming in with my 5 and 6, going, "Can I have It's All Over Now by the Rolling Stones, please?" and they all looked at me and sort of, you know, like I was an 11-year-old kid, probably, you know. Yep, there you are, you know. And I felt so embarrassed by having bought that. I felt so uncomfortable buying it. I only played it twice.
Okay.
I mean, I loved it, but I just was so, it reminded me of being up there with these big guys with their quiffs and, you know, they'd grown up, you know, they had big shoes, they had big everything, looking down at little me who hadn't got anything big yet. And then, well, but then when I was 14, I bought, or 13 even, I think, I bought my first copy of Highway 61 by Bob Dylan. First of many. And then, you know, I spread out from there, so yeah.
So those early, I mean, when you were purchasing that Rolling Stones record, little did you know that a couple decades later you'd be seeing the Dancing in the Streets video, and, you know, perhaps that didn't age as well, but of course Dylan, to this day, you still cover.
30 years.
A couple decades?
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't know what's going to last at that stage, but in a way you don't care.
That's true.
You don't, if someone says you're not going to, you know, you're not going to love your childhood sweetheart, you're not going to love Millie when you're 60 or something, you won't be together then.
You're like, no way, that's not possible.
Or you know, you may not be with her, but you'll certainly remember her, and she'll remember you. What happens then is its most intense. The colours are brightest. You know, I remember seeing just like green or purple circles of cloth when I was 3 or 4, and I can still remember just how those colours looked. You know, that was strong. Yeah. And the music you hear at that age is powerful. So if you've grown up listening to The Cure and that kind of thing, that's what means the most to you. Yeah. It happened that I coincided with the Stones and the Beatles, and then in my adolescence, Bob Dylan. Yeah. And all that stuff is still on. I see there's a festival, there's a kind of, it's called Old Man Rock. They're having one in the next spring with the Stones, McCartney and Dylan. And
that Coachella, Indio,
Coachella for old folk, you know.
Neil Young, some other folks, Roger Waters, I think.
All, you know, all your old gatefold sleeves. There it is, so it's the same people. The one, that music has just carried on. It's accompanied everybody for life. You know, Blonde on Blonde is 50 and it's as popular as it ever was. And the difference is that back then, rock was not history driven. It wasn't nostalgia driven. Now it's an old man's game. It's full of old people. You know, I mean, I'm 63, but I can sit here in comfort knowing that the generation a dozen years older than me is still out there commanding huge fees and looking and sounding from a distance pretty much as they did 50 years ago.
There's something kind of reassuring about that, right? Knowing that there's still a market, that there's still appreciation out there. Maybe next year, Coachella headliner Robyn Hitchcock, maybe we'll see you out there.
You won't see me doing that kind of thing because I don't have that kind of, I'm not that kind of artist. Yeah. But I think it's more interesting is like in 20 years' time, even Paul McCartney and Bob Dylan and Paul Simon will have gone. I mean, there's been this awful cull recently of people like Bowie and Lemmy and Alan Prince and Alan Rickman wasn't a musician, but that age, they were not that generation wasn't due to go, and a lot of those people have gone all.
They weren't the people that you expected to pass. Yeah.
You know, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Paul and Ringo, the Stones, Dylan, that lot are still intact. But in 20 years' time, they're unlikely to still be performing. Even Rod Stewart may have packed it in. I mean, even I may well have stopped by then. It's interesting to see whether classic rock per se will carry on once its protagonists are off the map. You know, like right now, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, a global coming that neither tours as such, but their members are still around. You know, that stuff is as popular as it ever was. I mean, I wonder if anything will be here in 25 years' time, or at least in the form that we recognise it. There's this. It's just an odd ride that these things you expect to become extinct haven't. Yeah. And so people like me, who are kind of little creatures that scuttle around in the undergrowth, we're not the main feature. Mm-hmm. But you know, I too am in a way have been a constant for 35. Soon it'll be 40 years. Next year it's 40 years since the first Soft Boys single. So there are people coming to see me now who've been seeing me for 35 years or more, and you know that you become a constant, I suppose, but you're not going to be there forever. So I mean, I'm really stating the obvious.
We keep bringing up these themes of mortality, and so don't want to, you know, but I really appreciate, again, your candidness. One reason why I really respect you, many reasons, but particularly your candidness to really speak in kind of a humanistic fashion. There's not a lot of pretense. You know, we're talking about real.
There's nothing to pretend about. This isn't show business. Yeah. You know, I'm not selling anybody a myth. As someone said on a review of my box set, that my stuff doesn't function as escapism. It's not escapism. It's simply a way of looking at the world, but it's not an attempt to escape.
It's almost immersion almost when
you know, my songs are an attempt to deal with reality as I see it, just as our dreams are an attempt to process our lives. We don't know how or why it works. And I'm always the first to kind of hand the steering wheel to the unconscious and say, you take over. You know, I don't, because I don't really necessarily trust conscious impulses. You know, I think the truth has its own compass, and you just need to let it take you there. And I don't have to make thousands of people feel happy. I just have to make a few people feel a bit weird, and then my job is done.
That's what it's going to say on your tombstone, Robyn. He made it more than a few people feel weird, and I think that's good enough as a legacy.
You know, you need somewhere else to go. That's the thing. You need not so much as entertainment, but simply for your sanity. At least I do. You know. Guess where I went, folks? This is Hollywood.
Yes, indeed. Robyn, a question I have for you, and we'll get going here in a little bit. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Here we are in Southern California, in LA more specifically, and in the 1980s, early 80s into the mid 80s, there was a scene here called the Paisley Underground, kind of a neo-psychedelia scene, bands like the 3 O'Clock, Dream Syndicate, Steve Wynn, Rain Parade. Being a fan of kind of the classic era of psychedelia from the 60s, were you familiar with sort of the 80s psychedelia revival? Was it something that you liked, or I always wanted to ask you about that?
I didn't hear a lot of it, actually. I mean, I knew there was something going on, and I've met a few of the people that were involved kind of later over the years. But I mean, it was good to know that there were other people. It was basically other people who were listening to the same records. It was interesting that it appeared in LA rather than New York. It couldn't really appear in Britain because Britain was under such a kind of Stalinist punk and post-punk grip. The rock press were not yet ready to allow people to like the Byrds and Love and the Doors and or indeed the Soft Boys. And so I think the people over here probably, I think a lot of them had heard the Soft Boys. So it was good. It probably helped give us an audience. You know, we were starting to get endorsements from American musicians, which was great. And so I mean, I'm all in favour of it. But I have not sat down with a 3 or even stood up with a 3 o'clock record. I'm afraid, but you know, I've met a few of them. You know, I approve of it. Okay. I've just been lazy.
The Robyn Hitchcock seal of approval there. Robyn, talking about, I mean, it sounds like there was potentially a crescendo there, and I've heard it from other artists of that sort of classic era, you know, late 80s into the early 90s, of course. Then everybody was looking for the next big thing, the young, hip, relatable A&R guys going up to Seattle. Some people talk about the late 80s, early 90s as kind of the era, the end of that sort of golden era. Do you also kind of agree that there was kind of too much money coming into the scene, too much entropy, perhaps?
I don't know there was too much money coming into it. There's always been money. I think there was a stylistic shift. More just that the sort of the wave of kind of spangle rock that we were on, the Replacements, 10,000 Maniacs, REM, into which we fitted, and you know that surfed through the 80s and into the early 90s, and then basically kind of loud rock came back with Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and Nirvana were brilliant and very melodic. Or Kurt Cobain was many more things than just loud, but the grunge allowed the kids to rock again in a non-ironic way. It didn't even the Brits were allowed to rock, and the Brits had only been allowed to rock ironically since punk.
That's right.
But
and then a little bit with the shoegaze movement that came in a little bit.
It was around the same time, but basically things got very loud, much louder than people like me could deal with. And I was, you know, coming up for 40, I was ready to drop off the rock perch and start becoming an acoustic, what I am now, you know, which is kind of what I had been even before the Soft Boys, just a solo entertainer in the folk clubs. I think the college scene probably was exploited. MTV changed too. It became a sort of softcore porn spring break thing for people who wanted to watch people in thongs throwing up on beaches. It was no longer a place where you could go and watch people like me or my descendants on 120 Minutes. It all, yeah, I'm sure money corrupted everything, but I mean, it always does. You know, look who might be our next president. I mean, that doesn't really change. It just takes different form. The music business works for you if you're making a lot of money. It'll make money for you if you're making money for everyone else. And then if you get very powerful, like Madonna or Mick Jagger or someone, you can cut your own deals, and actually you are getting half of the money. Yeah. I never made a lot of money for anyone else, nor did the Soft Boys or the Egyptians or whatever. You know, so we were tolerated in certain areas, and I think some people thought we were going to appeal to people that we didn't. And you know, it came and it went. I mean, I've done fine. I've just carried on, and in a way, that's all you can do.
That is true. Well, Robyn, any final words? Again, thank you so much for all your graciousness here today. But any last thing you'd like to say on any topic? This is your chance. No pressure. You've got 5 seconds to decide.
Oh, you know, it's whatever it is, it will seem inevitable with hindsight.
Wonderful final words. Robyn, thanks again for your time. It was a real
welcome.
pleasure. Thank
You're
you so
welcome,
much.
Jason.